Hey everybody. Um, Good to be back with you guys and kind of just going over cultural intelligence and trying to just be better communicators. And that really is the ultimate goal here. So um, any you guys remember how we kind of wrapped up defining culture last time? Doesn't have to be word for word.
An integrated system of learned behavior, a total way of life. It contains what we pass along to our children, what is normal, what is acceptable. It's a subconscious program thing. That's what I wrote
All
down.
right, you got word for word then. Perfect.
Yes,
Um,
notes.
yeah, that's awesome. That's, it's just that kind of, how to simplistically, how do we teaching our kids to live life? That's we're passing on culture. And so typically that's, we're passing on what was given to us through our family, our community. Um, but yeah, it's just that those kind of standards of what is normal and acceptable or what's not. So did any of you guys happen to notice over this last week after we talked last time, just kind of had an interaction with someone that maybe was a little bit more, they're like, oh, wonder if that was a cultural thing.
Hmm.
Anything stand out to you guys? It's okay if you didn't, but just
One
yeah,
thing until you asked that, I didn't think about it, but I think Sunday mornings in a church service, whether you've been there a day or 10 years, there's cultural stuff going on all around us. How people, where they
mm-hmm.
sit, or how they do, or how they receive it. Anyway, I just noticed. I was thinking about that just a little bit, just looking at the room of people and how kind of everybody, family wise or grouping wise, does things.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of like my main objective with coaching folks in this cultural intelligence is just trying to create a curiosity, uh, stopping us from jumping to assumptions or judgments, but just taking a moment to pause and kind of wonder why that person is doing that or things like that. And so trying to create those patterns in our brain because when we're always surrounded by people that we know or feel comfortable with, we can go into that autopilot mode of, oh well, he did this because of X, Y, or Z. But when you start interacting with people from different cultures, man, those assumptions go out the window real quick because you can't take anything for granted. So um, yeah, so we're trying to just practice that skipping judgments. Now, last time we were talking about just culture, kind of what that was about. Now we want to kind of practice, like, how do we actually do this? So Becca and I, we went through some rather extensive linguistics and cultural anthropology training, a lot of great theories and really wonderful tools to integrate into a new culture. But when we finally got on the ground, all of a sudden, like, we were just fighting to stay alive at times, finding food or what foods we could actually eat and things like that. And so then you start throwing language learning in there and trying to go out and be engaged and make new friends. It got pretty overwhelming real quick. And so all those tools and great theories kind of went out the window because we were just in that survival mode. And it wasn't until I discovered cultural intelligence quite a few years later, it's like finally there's like this grid, a kind of a tool to help me keep on track. And so that's why I really fell in love with cultural intelligence. We're going to dive into the four capabilities of cultural intelligence real quick here, but just briefly, this was discovered probably about 20 years ago, kind of this pattern, this program. It was in Singapore. They had a whole bunch of cross-cultural teams coming together to work on the Y2K issue, and we had people from programmers and people in all those different IT industries from all over the world working together. And there was a Singaporean consultant there, and she started noticing some of these teams were doing really well at being able to bridge those cultural differences. And so she started kind of looking into it and started focusing a lot of research on that area. And she discovered that these people that are more naturally gifted at cross-cultural communication, cross-cultural work teams, they had four key capabilities. And these are things that can be developed and grown and keep working on them. But some people are just more naturally gifted at it than others. And so it's a neat way of kind of just practicing and being able to gauge where you're at on those scales. But yeah, anyways, it's nice to know it comes from actual, it's not just some random person that made it up, but actually it comes from some pretty rigorous academic circles. So anyway, so to start off, we got these 4 different capabilities. The first one is drive. And your drive is that kind of natural curiosity to enter into a new cultural experience. And it's also the factor that kind of keeps pushing you into these experiences, especially when it gets difficult, cultural fatigue or culture shock, or just being tired of always being different. So the drive is that kind of that motivator. What is that motivation pushing me forward to do these experiences? What's my motivation for continuing to work with this coworker from Timbuktu that I have a really hard time understanding? I say everything I say, they take it the wrong way. I just, there's difficulties. And so the drive is that thing that helps motivate us and keep us going forward. So I would say for most of our ministry partners at Perception Funding, the love of Jesus is probably the first and foremost motivator for our ministry partners that are working in difficult circumstances or cross-culturally. But what would you think are some other factors, like drives, motivators that maybe our ministry partners or even you guys have gone through to push through those hard experiences?
I don't know if this, just that desire to make a difference, to have impact or something like that.
Yep.
I think just a natural fascination with other places and other cultures. I think just you use the word curiosity, but just an interest in general of like learning more of what makes someone tick or causes them to respond to something in a certain way, or what values they hold. So just an interest in them as a person and also where they're coming from, ultimately, I think, to seek to have better understanding and the ability to relate.
Yeah, for sure. It's there's a couple different types. I mean, we're doing a real basic overview here, but there's kind of some 2 key areas. There's the extrinsic and the intrinsic motivators or drive factors. And, we can have those, that heart, love, want to share the love of Jesus, that personal curiosity. I love learning about this, trying new foods. But there's also those extrinsic things of like, hey, I know, I need to raise support. And so like, I need those funds to keep doing this. So I need to have those external motivators, factors there. So something for me when I was first couple of years in China, first year or so, I guess, was probably the hardest of just so many new things and kind of between language classes and just going out and, doing errands and, getting groceries, whatnot, it would just be pretty overwhelming at certain points. And all of a sudden I'm like, don't want to go out the door. I don't want to answer my phone. Like I'm just kind of burnt out. And I discovered that going to the local tea market was just something that just really kind of revitalized me and kind of like, oh man, this is why I'm here. Being able to practice language with these new people over tea and learn that culture was just something that kind of reignited that for me. And so when we're talking about the drive, we're trying to look for those things that just kind of keep us pushing forward and pushing into the hard. And because if you don't have any kind of those motivators, it's going to be hard to go through the difficulty, to put in the hours to keep pushing forward. And so creating that drive, keeping it healthy is really helpful. So that's the first capability.
I think something that I struggle with other people's drive from different cultures is, so I feel like as the operations director and founder, that we get someone from a foreign country who's, they're in poverty, and they're in
Mm,
a place where they and a lot of people around them have been really hurt, and so they're super motivated to try and find a solution. And so this has happened multiple times, but just happened recently, where a new ministry partner took all of our e-courses in less than 24 hours. And
mm,
so to me, it's like I get their drive and their motivation, but it's like there's no way you learned anything from
mm.
taking all of them in 24 hours. Like I sent you one and asked you to take one, and that we would discuss it on our next call. And so it's super, then I'm super not driven to work with them because they just accomplish
Yeah.
all of
Well,
this.
yeah. Well, and that's, there's so many different factors at play there, right? You've got your motivation, your drive is like this specific area, right? Theirs is a different area, but you're for the same goal, same purpose. You're trying to get to that same, caring for those people. But yeah, and then different cultures, what do they put priorities on and all those kind of things. Yeah, it's hard to match and relate to those sometimes.
Mhm.
But being aware of it is the biggest hurdle in the beginning. So um, yeah, the I always like to ask for these different capabilities and kind of all these areas. Is like looking back to the Bible. Do we see any examples of what is a good healthy drive? What do we see any biblical characters? You know, um, expressions of of drive, that motivation for the task that they are going into. Anything come to mind?
I mean, I think of the early church and their consistency in meeting together, and just the impetus of like discipleship and going out to share the gospel. How consistent I think it seemed like they were in doing that, even to the point where like they recognized that there were poor among them, and they decided to like form a separate committee of people that would respond to the poor, so that those who were called to be apostolic could do that, and then those who are called to care for the widow and the orphan could do that. And
Mm,
yeah, that just represents like a passion and pursuit of spreading the good news.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I was just coming out of Christmas season, but Emmanuel, Jesus, God with us, that kind of idea of um, there was a lot of motivation for God to come and connect with us as humans. Obviously, Jesus can be kind of a hard example to relate to in some of these dry areas, but there's yeah, I look at Paul, had a lot of a drive to him, didn't he? And so just helpful to kind of look at some different perspectives and different characters and different situations of why did they keep going. But
I was thinking of Saul and Paul, right? As Saul, he had one drive, right? And as Paul, a different drive.
yeah, yep, absolutely. All right, so we'll move on to the next capability here. So that first one was drive. The next one is knowledge. Knowledge is just that gathering of pertinent information that will just help me in my interactions. So, I mean, first of these would obviously be language, being able to connect and communicate with people. That's an aspect of the knowledge gathering. I like to call it the knowledge bucket, because oftentimes, I'm learning and throwing information into this bucket, and I have no idea when I'm actually going to use it or when it's going to come into play. But I know I've seen many times where I had just a little bit of information about some random area, and that little bit opened up a lot of doors for a relationship with someone. Like, oh, about, example, Confucius I think had 10 disciples. And the fact that I could say, oh yeah, I know Confucius has these disciples, are any of them from this area? And that just opened up this huge opportunity of connection with people in my area. So yeah, can you think of any other areas of information gathering that'd be helpful if you're in a new country or a new location with people?
think a lot of times people really connect with nature and creation in terms of
Mm,
just as a form of connecting with their beliefs. And so,
yeah, that's a great one. So I would have like I had used like geography as an example of that, but I hadn't thought of like actual nature, like specific plants and different things are right around them. I hadn't thought of those terms. That's great.
I love to ask about like families and family structure, family dynamic, like where people's families are from, where do they live, like um, how many people are in their family, and then
Yeah.
also holidays, important holidays and like
Mm.
celebration times and things like that.
So the main reason I asked all of you guys questions, but also other people these kind of questions, is because I'm actually trying to learn from you, because these are some great thoughts I wouldn't have thought of in some of these regards. So um, yeah, these are all just different pieces that you're just kind of throwing into that bucket. You're just gathering information. You're trying to understand a little bit better, and have more things to pull from when you are interacting with people. And then the more that man, it opens up a lot of doors. So one big thing I've found, food. Most people love to talk about their foods. At least across Asia, I've not been to Africa yet, but and different places. So people take a lot of pride in that. Local customs, taboos, things that are kind of just general, like good to know, like, oh yeah, you always take your shoes off when you're in this country, or you never pat you never touch kids' heads in Cambodia. Random kind of facts like that, but those are helpful, right? To know how to interact in a way that's respectful to this other culture. Um, Something that I have found helpful, I mentioned it, that Confucius example, but like history, understanding the history of the area. You have no idea how close that person is that you're interacting with, how close they are to some of these historical events. And if you don't know anything about, like the Cultural Revolution for us in China, like that was a big thing, and ran to people who were starving to death during that time. And in fact, I could almost honor them with understanding and awareness of it. Showed a lot of care for that person. So knowledge comes into play in a lot of different areas. And it's definitely something that it's easy to kind of just, like, when you think about cultural interactions, kind of just like, oh yeah, I just need to gather this information. And that is a big part of it. But it's also feeds into the next two capabilities that we're going to talk about. Before I get there, we're going to be talking the next week or so about the different cultural values. I think I mentioned those last time, and so those cultural values are a big part of this knowledge bucket. They're kind of just tools to be aware of these different values that we find. So we'll get to that next week, but just again, biblical examples. Can you think of any biblical examples of where knowledge of a specific cross-cultural interaction came into play? One that I have thought of is Paul. I forget what city he was in, but he's talking about, I think it was Mars Hill, where he's talking about, you have all these, idols. He's walking on the road up the mountain and he sees all these idols, and he talks about that, the idol to the unknown God up there. And so he took note of that. He gathered that information, and he didn't necessarily know if it was going to come into play later on, but he used that in being able to, whoever he was teaching to, he used that specific local bit of knowledge to kind of really connect with his audience there. Yeah.
Yeah, he was in Athens there.
Athens, thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
I think maybe the story of the Samaritan woman, like just Jesus' knowledge of the Samaritans and how they might perceive a Jewish man, coming up and approaching her at the well, and how he could use that perception and how he was kind of bucking some of the traditional cultural norms towards women or towards Samaritans to actually minister to her in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think Jonah, I mean, he knew he didn't want to go to Nineveh. And
Can't blame him.
with their violent culture and stuff, but also it helped him over time figure out how to navigate it. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just having the awareness, having those, understanding kind of some background really opens up a lot of doors, and for good or bad. But yeah, definitely being aware of those things opens up. So awesome. Any other thoughts on knowledge you guys want to toss out? All right, Jonathan, we have still some time. We can go through the next two.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So that's we did have the drive, the motivation we have, kind of feeds into that gathering of knowledge, gathering of information. But then what do we do with those two, right? We want to use them. We don't want to just have them just sitting there. And so that's the next capability, and that is strategy. Strategy is that intentionally planning your cross-cultural interactions. So for me, this is, proactively planning, whether you're going to Peru for a trip with Pepe and Aaron, right? It's taking that strategy and okay, what do I need to do? I need to, brush up on some Spanish. What are some specific areas that are we going to be in a village? Are we going to be in an urban center? Like starting to think through planning of what you're entering into. This can feed into, language learning. All right, I am, say for example, sorry, one sec, make sure I got my examples, not crossing them. Yeah, so if you're going to know that you're going to be going to a wedding in Peru, let's take some time and, talk with a Peruvian friend or a language teacher and try to learn, intentionally be planning ahead and looking at, okay, what does a traditional ceremony look like? What can I be expecting? What are going to be the expectations of me being there? For me, when I was in China, we got to go to a couple different weddings, and we were the only white people there, and that brought a certain aspect of attention and honor to the bride and groom. I was asked to give a wedding speech, which was definitely an awkward thing for me, especially with my language level at that point. But I did take a little bit of time beforehand and, learned the appropriate language expression of, congratulations, may you have a long life, happy marriage, those kind of things. But what are the appropriate ways of doing those things? Or even what are the expectations for gifts and gift giving and all that? So it's that, intentionality of looking ahead, planning ahead. So something else, is making goals for yourself to keep pushing into the uncomfortable or those unknowns. That pairs a lot with the drive. Needing to be intentional with doing the things that will build your drive, but then also using that motivation to not just go out and have fun and sit at the coffee shop waiting for someone to interact with you, but hey, okay, if I keep going to this same coffee shop, I have the same, barista there every week. So maybe I can start up conversations with him, things like that. So a lot of intentionality, planning ahead, not just experiencing things as they come, but actually intentionally going to engage and experience certain cultural aspects. This can also apply to, if you have a coworker from Peru, taking time to, all right, he keeps talking about, X, Y, or Z. Maybe I should take some time to actually, fill that knowledge bucket because I have no idea what he's talking about. So, yeah, but that being intentional with curiosity, I found taking notes, writing things down, making plans definitely opened up a lot in that area. So have you found yourself being intentional with knowing you're going into a certain cultural situation and maybe planning ahead, preparing for that in a good way?
I I think that even just in our own neighborhoods, people um, we don't even think about having a plan or a strategy. And so that harder for when we go somewhere else. But just a good example for our own neighborhood for us is our church is in an actual neighborhood and like there's houses all around it. And so we've had a hard time getting to know the neighbors right here. And we tried different things and we realized just the strategy that worked was just any time of the year you just walk around the neighborhood with a coffee cup, and that just tells people that you're not in a hurry and that you're I don't know that you're easygoing and are up for conversation. And just the neighborhood right here, just walking around with a coffee cup just opens up
Hmm.
conversations and people's walls drop. And uh, so I think just having a strategy is
Yeah.
the step that we're used to going into things without one.
Yeah. So like to dissect that a little bit, like, it wasn't going door to door and asking if they would just come to your church, right? That didn't necessarily it didn't really work
No,
necessarily. I don't know if you did that or not, but you
no,
were
yeah.
looking for ways that how are other people in the community you like connecting with each other? Like, how am I presenting myself as open, available? You were taking that time to be intentional with thinking through those kind of, the coffee cup. You mentioned that multiple times. Like, that's key. Like, you're an easygoing guy. I have a friend who, would drink crappy beer out in the parking lot with, some of the guys around the bed of his truck because that's how they connected. And that is the only way that he could, be able to connect and relate with these guys. And so, not him, but them relating to him, to my friend. So,
Mhm.
but yeah. So, any other thoughts on that, or any biblical examples that come to mind of kind of intentionally doing things in a cross cultural context?
So I didn't have the understanding of this, but it was brought to my attention as I was trying to do. We were trying to do Young Life, try to start a ministry in a community in a portion of Kansas City, Kansas, which is a pretty diverse community. But what I didn't understand is, as we would go there, the first couple times we went, I either had a Young Life shirt on or Young Life coat on or whatever, just because that's what I had in my closet, and I put that on. And I was kind of made aware of, hey, when you come without a logo or a brand, come with just a shirt or just a jacket, because you may not be intending to, but you're coming here and people are seeing as somebody that's coming from outside the community with a brand that's coming here to fix or change. And that's not received well. And
Mm-hmm.
that was like mind blowing. And once they said it, it was like, yes, that makes sense. But I didn't even think of that. So the intentionality then was moving forward as we went into communities was to truly better understand that community of what even whatever we wore, right? Or
Absolutely.
had an impact on how we would be received.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great observation. The yeah, it affects every area, right? And all those
Mm-hmm.
things that you just are seem natural to you, right? I mean, how many people at your church come to church with a hat or a shirt that has a logo or something on it that's their organization, their company, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing it right now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just things that we don't think of that's normal to us, but it's different to others. And so being intentional with thinking through, asking those
Yeah.
kind of questions, being open to people talking about that with you
Yeah.
is huge. Showing that humbleness, the humility to accept that. So yeah. So any biblical examples that come to mind? For me, the one that came to mind was, when Paul would go into a new city, a new town, he would always go to the synagogue first. And I was starting to kind of think about that and realize that he was being intentional because he knew that those people had an understanding of, the foundation of, the creator, Yahweh, God, He was being he knew that those people were are open to spiritual topics and conversations. And there was a lot of connection points there. Obviously, Jesus was sent by Yahweh. They were the one and the same, the Trinity there. So he would start there, and then he would branch out from there, go to the markets or wherever else. But that was a clear sign of strategic planning on his part.
Yeah.
Think about Paul and how he would, in some of his letters, talk about how he refused to be a burden to the people that he would come to minister to. Like he planned ahead to be a tent maker, and so that he could come and just offer freely the things that God had entrusted to him. And I think that that can be really important. And yet on the other hand, you have Jesus like sending out the 72 and telling them not to take anything with them, and that automatically put them in a position of having to depend on whomever they were going to meet their basic needs. And so you have kind of two different strategies there to look at, but I think they were both probably important depending on who they were being sent to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example. Yeah, because I think during that time there were a lot of these what do you call itinerant preachers or whatever that would go around, and that's how they made their money. I think it was in Acts that talks about that one guy. I started talking before I started thinking about it. Anyways, we'll stop at that example, but I like that. Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts on the strategy? All right, so we'll dive into the action. This is the last one. This is kind of where the rubber meets the road. And so this is putting your drive, which feeds your knowledge. The knowledge is, plays into your strategy.
We lost you, Jeremiah.
Were you
Go ahead.
All right, sorry about that. All right, so action, rubber meets the road. We're putting all these different pieces into play, the drive, knowledge, strategy, they're all feeding into each other. And so we're going out there and interacting with someone. So from my experience, I would be riding the bus everywhere, take the bus to go to the post office to pick up a package. And, the design, what I wanted was to sit there on my phone or listen to some music and kind of zone out. But using cultural intelligence, I would try to actively remind myself of why I'm there. I look around at the people and think about their stories. So trying to feed into that, the drive, remind myself of that. Then I would look at, maybe some of the older people on the bus, and I'd start wondering, like, hey, I wonder if what their experience of the Cultural Revolution was like. Were they starving, or were they living out on a farm where they had a little bit more self-sustainability there? And trying to start asking myself some of those kind of questions, and make note of the things that I was curious about that I could maybe later on bring up with a teacher or a friend. And then, maybe had an experience on the bus with seeing, a young guy offer the old lady his seat on the bus, and take note of, how did he motion for her to take his seat, or what were they doing? And then, so that's strategy, really being intentional with it. And then in the end, just engaging with those people around me, maybe offer my seat to someone else, or try to ask a question about something they're holding, or asking where they're going to, things like that. So, but make sure I'm being thoughtful and intentional with how I'm doing that in a culturally appropriate way. Yeah, we see a lot of this throughout the Bible, but when you start taking time to actually think about it and practice these things in everyday life, it's a lot harder, but it takes just being aware of it and planning for it. So, Joe, you look like you had a comment on that.
No, I think no, I don't, but I think that's, again, I was just reading through them, having steps or having a plan, having the steps ahead of your plan, right,
Hmm.
gives you a plan.
Absolutely. And then having all four of those, I've encouraged everyone I coach with this, like print these out, put them on your wall, like next to your mirror or wherever, next to your front door, and just be like asking yourself, when I actually was like, hey, am I intentionally working on building up my drive? Or have I done anything this week to fill up that knowledge bucket just beyond the bare what's required of me? Are there other areas of my knowledge buckets that I need to start filling? And have I done anything to plan ahead this week for interacting with, this foreign coworker, or going out into the community, and interfacing with this other group, cultural group, or and then just being thoughtful and engaging with that, using all four of those as you are interacting with people,
Mm-hmm.
goes a long way for opening things up. So.
Thanks, Jeremiah. We look forward to the rest of the time and appreciate you teaching us.
Appreciate the engagement and the patience. So appreciate you guys.